I thought this vacation would help us reconnect, but instead, it became the turning point of our marriage. My wife and I had been together for a decade, and while life had been good in many ways, something had gradually shifted between us. We had two wonderful children who were the center of our world, but like many parents, we found ourselves trapped in an unending cycle of responsibilities. Mornings were spent rushing to get the kids ready for school. My wife managed breakfast while I handled other tasks. After work, we alternated cooking dinner, helping with homework, and managing bedtime routines. Evenings were usually spent sitting in silence in front of the TV before heading to bed, too tired to hold meaningful conversations. Weekends weren't much different, filled with errands and children's activities. Somewhere in the chaos, we had lost the connection we once shared. It hadn't always been this way. Back when we were dating, we could spend hours talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. But now, even when we had some free time, we felt disconnected. Conversations were reduced to discussions about bills or logistics, like who would handle soccer practice that week. It was then that I suggested we take a vacation, a break from the routine that had consumed us. No kids, no work, just the two of us. I imagined romantic walks on the beach, candlelit dinners, and mornings spent talking without interruptions. I hoped it would remind us of why we fell in love. To my relief, she agreed without hesitation. Maybe she felt the same distance, or perhaps she just wanted a change of scenery. Whatever her reasons, we booked a tropical getaway, envisioning it as a chance to reset our relationship. I was optimistic, even excited, that this could bring us closer. The resort welcomed us with warm sunshine, the soothing sound of waves, and the laughter of carefree vacationers. The beach was stunning, soft white sand stretching into the distance, and crystal-clear waters sparkling under the sunlight. For a brief moment, it felt like the escape we desperately needed. Our first day together brought small but meaningful joys. We strolled along the shoreline hand in hand, letting the waves lap at our feet. She giggled as a tiny crab darted past, and her laughter was a sound I hadn't heard in far too long. That evening, we shared a quiet meal by the ocean, the sunset painting the sky in beautiful hues of orange and pink. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were reconnecting. Yet even amid the smiles, there were subtle signs that something was off. She spent more time on her phone than I expected, scrolling through social media or texting. When I suggested a sunrise walk the next morning, she declined, saying she needed more rest. It wasn't a big issue, but it stung. And in the still moments when distractions faded, the emotional distance between us became harder to ignore. I noticed her staring into the distance, lost in thought, her expression wistful. When I asked what was on her mind, she would brush it off, saying it was nothing important. I didn't push, but I couldn't help wondering if she felt as invested in this trip as I was. Still, I held on to hope. We were here to mend the rift between us and remember what had drawn us together in the first place. I told myself that these small signs didn't mean much, that we were just tired from the stresses of daily life. Surely this vacation would help us reconnect. But sometimes, ignoring the cracks only makes them deeper. No amount of stunning sunsets or pristine beaches could heal what was already slipping through our fingers. One evening, the beach buzzed with energy, alive with music and laughter. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the ocean waves. The air was filled with the rhythmic beats of Afro-Caribbean music, the crash of waves, and the cheerful chatter of vacationers enjoying the festivities. A makeshift stage had been set up near the water, surrounded by flickering torches. A lively announcer invited people to join a dance competition, hyping up the crowd. Vendors wove through the crowd, their colorful carts adding vibrancy to the already lively scene. My wife stood in the middle of it all, her face lit by the torch's warm glow. I thought this trip would bring us closer, but instead, it marked the moment our marriage began to unravel. When my wife saw the announcer call for participants in the local dance competition, her face lit up with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. "I want to join," she said, her voice full of excitement, almost like a child asking for permission. Before I could respond, she was already slipping off her sandals and heading toward the stage, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. This wasn't surprising. She had always loved dancing and being the center of attention. I stayed back, content to watch, settling into my chair with a drink in hand. I admired her ability to embrace moments like this, diving in without hesitation. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with. As she took her place on stage, the announcer handed her a numbered sash, and the crowd erupted into cheers. I couldn't help but smile. Then he appeared, a young, confident local who exuded charm. With an easy smile and a smooth bow, he introduced himself to my wife. She giggled as he took her hand, and they stepped onto the dance floor together. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a dance, a fun activity during our vacation. But as they moved together, my chest tightened. His movements were fluid and sure, his confidence palpable. He spun her effortlessly, and she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years, uninhibited and carefree. Her face glowed with a joy that felt foreign to me, as though I was watching someone I didn't fully recognize. The crowd clapped and cheered, but I felt an uneasy knot forming in my stomach. The way he held her, the way she leaned into him, it was too much. I stayed on the sidelines, clapping half-heartedly, pretending everything was fine. But the cheerful music felt like a cruel joke, drowning out the storm of emotions building inside me. When the music ended, the crowd erupted in applause as they bowed together. I forced myself to approach her, trying to mask my frustration. "Can we talk?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. She frowned but followed me a few steps away. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "What are you doing out there? This doesn't feel right. I think you should stop." Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to defiance. "What's the big deal? It's just a dance. We're on vacation. I'm allowed to have a little fun." I tried to explain how it made me feel, how it seemed like she was ignoring me entirely, but she waved it off, her tone sharp. "We're married, but that doesn't mean you control me. You don't get to tell me what to do." Her words stung. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted her to understand how much this was hurting me. But in that moment, it became clear that she didn't care. This wasn't about the dance. It was about something deeper. It was about the distance that had been growing between us for years. I swallowed the lump in my throat and gave her one last chance. "If you go back out there and dance with him again, you won't find me here when you come back." She laughed, brushing off my words as though they were meaningless, and walked back toward the stage without a backward glance. The music started again, and I stood there frozen, watching her spin and laugh with a man we barely knew. It hit me like a wave. Our marriage had been broken for years, and I had been too blind to see it. All the signs were there. The silent dinners, the nights spent scrolling on our phones instead of talking, the distracted look in her eyes when I tried to connect. I had convinced myself it was stress or exhaustion, but now I realized it was more than that. This wasn't just a dance. It was a final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for far too long. I turned and walked back to the hotel, my footsteps heavy. I didn't call out to her or make a scene. What was the point? She didn't even notice I was gone. When I reached our room, the silence was deafening. It was the kind of quiet that made loneliness feel like a physical weight. I began packing my things, my hands moving automatically. I didn't have a plan, no idea where I would go or what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay, not when the person I had loved for so long no longer seemed to care about me or our marriage. A fleeting moment with a stranger became more important to her than the life we had built together. The realization struck me as I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase zipped and ready by my side. My fingers trembled as I confirmed the ride to the airport, knowing I wasn't just leaving behind a vacation. I was walking away from the dreams we once shared, the family we had built, and the woman I thought would stand beside me forever. For years, I had convinced myself that we could fix what was broken, that love alone could hold us together. But now, sitting there in that room, I knew I deserved more. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but someone who chose me wholeheartedly. As I climbed into the taxi and told the driver to take me to the airport, I felt the weight of all I was leaving behind. Yet, for the first time in years, I also felt a strange clarity. Sometimes, letting go is the only way to rediscover yourself. When I returned home, the silence was overwhelming. It wasn't the quiet of a house at rest, but the heavy stillness of absence. The emptiness of the space struck me. No laughter, no faint music playing in the background, no trace of her presence. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where she would often curl up with a book or her phone. Memories came flooding back. The way her smile could light up a room, the late-night conversations about our dreams, the days when it felt like nothing could break us. But those days were long gone. Over time, life's demands had buried our connection beneath routines, responsibilities, and neglect. Conversations had dwindled into logistical exchanges about schedules and bills. We had become strangers living under the same roof, clinging to the remnants of what once was. I couldn't stop replaying that moment on the beach, her laughter, her defiant words. "You don't own me." It hit me harder than I wanted to admit. She hadn't felt free in our marriage for a long time, and I hadn't noticed. Maybe I had held on too tightly, trying to keep things together when all she wanted was space to breathe. But it wasn't just her words that stung. It was the way she walked away from me and back to him, the stranger who had made her laugh in ways I hadn't in years. That image haunted me, a painful reminder of how far apart we had drifted. For so long, I had clung to the idea of our marriage, convinced that we could find our way back to each other. But sitting there in the quiet of our home, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. Love wasn't enough to bridge the growing distance between us. The memories, the vacations, the celebrations, the late-night talks, felt like sand slipping through my fingers. There was sadness, of course, for everything we had built and lost. But there was also relief, a sense that I no longer had to fight for something that couldn't be saved. It wasn't anger or bitterness, just acceptance. Sometimes, no matter how much history two people share, they can drift too far apart to come back together. Walking away from her on that beach wasn't just about the dance. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, my happiness. It was about choosing to let go of a relationship that had become more of a struggle than a partnership. After that trip, her life took a different turn. At first, she didn't seem to grasp the gravity of what had happened. When she returned home, she was greeted by the emptiness of the house we had once built together, a home that now felt cold and unwelcoming. My belongings were gone, and the silence echoed louder than any argument we could have had. She called me in the first week, her voice a mix of confusion and irritation. She couldn't understand why I had left, why I couldn't just come back and pretend nothing had happened. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the dance or the stranger. It was about years of feeling unseen, about her seeking validation everywhere but within our relationship, about the cracks we had ignored for far too long. Eventually, her calls became less frequent. Maybe she started to accept the reality that our marriage was truly over. She stopped asking me to return and began focusing on her own life. What mattered most to me now were the kids. That night on the beach may have been the breaking point. But the truth was, our marriage had been unraveling long before she danced into his arms.